The strange thing about being underestimated is that people stop watching you. Rachel said that night with a laugh, swirling a glass of red wine while her friends leaned closer around the kitchen island. And I remember thinking how quiet the house felt even though 6 people were talking at once. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and for the past 8 years I've been married to Rachel, a woman who believes ambition should be loud, visible, and measured by titles printed on business cards. I don't blame her for thinking that way. From the outside, my life looks small. I work from home most days in a simple office with a second-hand desk. I drive a 5-year-old SUV with a faint coffee stain in the cup holder, and when Rachel's coworkers ask what I do, I usually say something vague like consulting or investing. The truth is complicated, and complicated truths tend to make people uncomfortable at dinner parties. So I keep it simple. That night Rachel was telling the story again, the one about the mystery investor who saved her mother's company 6 months earlier. Linda Parker, my mother-in-law, runs a regional home design firm outside Chicago, the kind of business that's been around long enough to have loyal clients, but fragile enough that one bad quarter can feel like a storm rolling over Lake Michigan. When the economy dipped last year, contracts dried up and the company came within weeks of shutting its doors. Rachel told the story proudly, the way people do when a miracle happens close to home. According to her version, a brilliant billionaire stepped in at the last minute, wiring millions of dollars into the company and restructuring the debt overnight. She described him like a legend, decisive, powerful, the kind of man who walks into a room and changes the temperature. Her friends nodded, impressed, imagining a tall executive in a sharp suit stepping out of a black car somewhere downtown. Rachel smiled and said she wished more men had that kind of drive. I leaned against the counter a few feet away, listening quietly, the same way I always do when these conversations drift in that direction. It's strange hearing someone praise a person they've never met when you know the truth sitting silently inside your own chest. 3 hours before that dinner started, I had been in my office signing a set of documents authorizing another $40 million in long-term funding for Linda's company. The paperwork moved through layers of trusts and investment groups with names most people would never connect to me. That's how Caldwell Capital works. It was built that way on purpose, quiet structures, invisible ownership, the kind of financial architecture that keeps the spotlight far away from my front door. Rachel kept talking, her voice bright, telling everyone how this mysterious investor must be one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. I watched her laugh and shake her head, saying she hoped to meet him someday just to thank him. And the strange part wasn't the story she was telling. The strange part was realizing she truly believed the most successful man connected to her family was still a stranger. After everyone left that night, the house finally became quiet again, the kind of quiet that settles slowly after laughter fades and the dishwasher hum becomes the loudest sound in the room. Rachel stood at the sink rinsing glasses while I wiped the counter beside her. She looked energized, the way she always did after being around people who talked about promotions, startups, and stock options. Rachel thrived on that energy. She had always believed the world rewarded the loudest ambition, the person who pushed hardest into every room. I admired that about her even when it created distance between us. She dried her hands with a towel and glanced at me with a small smile. She said that she hoped someday she could meet the man who saved her mother's company. She said he must be brilliant to move that kind of money so fast, and she wondered what someone like that even looked like. I shrugged and told her that investors usually look like ordinary people. She laughed and shook her head like that idea was ridiculous. In Rachel's mind, success had a certain shape. It wore tailored suits, arrived at meetings in black sedans, and spoke with the confidence of someone who had never doubted a decision in their life. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter while she continued talking about the investor as if he were a character in a story. She said that her mother described him as calm and strategic, someone who never rushed but always seemed 10 steps ahead. Rachel said that kind of power must come from decades of experience and connections. She said it must be incredible to have that level of influence, to change the future of an entire company with one signature. I nodded slowly because she was not entirely wrong. Influence does look like that from the outside. What people do not see is the quiet work behind it, the years of invisible decisions that happen in rooms where no cameras are present. Caldwell Capital began in a small office above a coffee shop in Boston 12 years ago when I was 30 years old and convinced that financial systems were quieter but more powerful than most people realized. I built the company around one rule. The best position of power is the one nobody notices. Over the years, that idea turned into something much larger than I ever expected. Investment networks expanded, private funds multiplied, and eventually the portfolio reached numbers that journalists would call staggering if they ever connected the dots. But the dots remained scattered across dozens of entities designed specifically to keep my name away from headlines. Rachel finished stacking the last glass in the cabinet and walked toward the living room. As she passed me, she said something that sounded casual but carried a familiar edge. She said that sometimes she wished I had more drive like the investor who helped her mother. She said that man clearly knew how to build something meaningful. I watched her walk away toward the couch where her laptop waited, glowing softly in the dim light. There was no anger in my chest when she said that. Only a quiet understanding of how easily perception becomes reality when people stop looking deeper. Rachel believed she understood ambition because she had spent years chasing it. What she did not understand yet was that sometimes the most powerful decisions happen in silence long before anyone realizes who made them. The following week settled into the same rhythm our life had followed for years, a rhythm so ordinary that most people would never question it. Every morning, Rachel left the house just after 7:30 with a travel mug of coffee and a quick glance at her phone as she walked to her car. She worked for a fast-growing marketing firm downtown, the kind of place where every meeting sounded urgent and every project promised to change the industry. Rachel loved that environment because it rewarded visibility. Promotions came to the people who spoke the loudest in conference rooms and stayed the latest at the office. Meanwhile, I usually began my mornings in the quiet office upstairs overlooking our backyard. The room was simple: one wide desk, two monitors, and a wall of windows that caught the soft Illinois sunlight as the day started. From the outside, it looked like the workspace of a freelancer or consultant. That illusion had always been intentional. Caldwell Capital operated across multiple time zones, so my workday rarely looked like a traditional schedule. Some mornings began with calls to analysts in New York reviewing infrastructure investments. Other afternoons were spent examining technology ventures in Austin or renewable energy projects along the California coast. Every decision traveled through layers of research before it ever reached my desk. Quiet power, like I always believed, required patience. Around noon one day, Rachel called while I was reviewing a report about regional manufacturing growth in the Midwest. Her voice sounded energized in the way it did whenever her mother's company came up in conversation. She said that Linda Parker had been invited to present at a leadership conference in Chicago and that several investors might attend. Rachel laughed and said it would be incredible if the mysterious investor who saved the company decided to appear. She said her mother was preparing a speech about resilience and smart partnerships. I could almost picture the stage already, the bright lights over a polished podium and rows of executives nodding politely while coffee cups steamed beside them. Rachel asked if I wanted to attend the conference with her. She said it might be inspiring for me to see how serious business leaders operate. Her tone was light, but the meaning beneath it was familiar. In her mind, the world of major decisions existed somewhere far above the quiet office where I spent my days. I told her that my schedule might allow it and that I would think about it. She said that if the investor showed up, it would be the opportunity of a lifetime to meet someone that influential. After the call ended, I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the backyard where the late autumn wind was pushing leaves across the grass. The truth was that I already knew about the conference. Caldwell Capital had quietly financed part of the event through a partner organization. My legal team had even prepared the introduction notes for Linda Parker in case the board asked about the investment partnership publicly. None of that information had reached Rachel yet. She still believed the man she admired existed somewhere far beyond our ordinary life. What she did not know was that the conference she was so excited about had been arranged through a series of decisions that began in this quiet room months earlier, long before anyone imagined the investor might step into the spotlight. 2 days later, Rachel came home earlier than usual, the sound of her heels crossing the hardwood floor echoing through the hallway while I was finishing a call in my office. I could hear the excitement in her voice before I even stepped downstairs. She was speaking on the phone with her mother, her tone bright and fast in the way people sound, when something important is about to happen. I waited until she finished before walking into the kitchen, where she was leaning against the counter with a wide smile on her face. She looked at me and said the conference was officially confirmed and that several major investors would be attending in person. According to her mother, the board believed the mysterious investor who rescued the company might finally appear publicly for the first time. Rachel said it like someone announcing a celebrity sighting. She said the entire company had been speculating for months about who the man could be. Some believed he was an older venture capitalist from New York. Others thought he might be a private equity executive based in San Francisco. Rachel laughed while listing the theories and said that whoever he was must be incredibly powerful to move that much capital so quietly. I listened while pouring coffee into 2 mugs and sliding one toward her. She thanked me without looking up from her phone, where messages from coworkers were already filling the screen with excitement about the conference. She told me the event would take place at a hotel overlooking Lake Michigan and that the leadership panel alone would include several well-known executives. Rachel said it would be a rare chance to stand in a room with people who shaped entire industries. Then she looked at me with that familiar expression that mixed curiosity with a little disbelief. She asked again if I wanted to attend with her. She said it might open my eyes to what real ambition looked like. I took a slow sip of coffee and told her that I would probably be there after all. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, as if she had not expected that answer. Rachel smiled and said she was glad because it might be the perfect opportunity for me to network with people who actually understood how large companies worked. I nodded quietly while she continued talking about the schedule for the day. She mentioned that the keynote session would introduce the investor responsible for stabilizing her mother's company. Apparently, the board had decided that the story of the investment was too significant to remain anonymous forever. Rachel said the moment would probably be the highlight of the entire conference. She imagined the investor walking onto the stage while cameras flashed and executives applauded. She said it would be inspiring to see the kind of person capable of making decisions that shape the future of a business overnight. When she finished speaking, she looked at me with a small grin and said she hoped the man turned out to be exactly as impressive as everyone imagined. I set my empty mug in the sink and glanced out the kitchen window toward the quiet street outside. The late afternoon sun was fading behind rows of oak trees, and the sky carried that calm gray color that comes before evening. Rachel was still talking about the conference when I turned back toward her. What she did not realize yet was that the board had not invited the investor as a guest. They had invited him as the person who would open the conference itself. The conference arrived faster than Rachel expected, and by Friday morning the city skyline was glowing under a pale autumn sun as we drove toward downtown Chicago. The hotel hosting the event stood beside Lake Michigan, a tall glass building reflecting the water like a mirror. Rachel had dressed carefully that morning, the way people do when they believe the day might change something important. She talked almost the entire drive about the executives who would be attending and the possibility that the mysterious investor might finally reveal himself. I listened quietly while the traffic moved slowly along Lakeshore Drive and the gray waves rolled against the shoreline to our right. When we pulled into the hotel entrance, a line of black cars and taxis was already forming near the doors. People in business suits walked across the polished lobby floor, carrying conference badges and paper folders. Rachel looked around with bright eyes like someone stepping into a world she had always imagined from a distance. She checked her phone again and said her mother had already arrived for the leadership panel rehearsal. According to Linda Parker, the entire board of directors was nervous because the investor had confirmed his attendance only 2 days earlier. Rachel said that kind of last-minute confirmation meant the man must be incredibly busy, someone whose schedule controlled half the industry. We walked through the lobby together and followed the signs toward the conference ballroom, where hundreds of chairs were arranged beneath wide chandeliers. The room buzzed with the low sound of conversations as executives greeted one another and reporters adjusted cameras near the stage. Rachel recognized several names on the program list and pointed them out quietly while we found our seats near the middle of the room. She whispered that it was hard to believe people with that level of influence were sitting only a few rows away. I watched the stage where a large screen displayed the conference title while assistants moved across the platform arranging microphones. Rachel leaned toward me again and said she hoped the investor would arrive soon because the opening session was about to begin. Her voice carried the same excitement she had shown all week. To her, the entire event felt like a glimpse into a different world. What she could not see yet was the quiet movement happening behind the stage curtains where two members of the organizing committee were speaking with my legal advisor. The schedule for the morning had changed slightly during the previous hour. Instead of appearing halfway through the conference, the investor would step forward at the beginning. Rachel was still scanning the crowd when the lights above the ballroom slowly dimmed and the moderator walked to the podium. The room grew quiet as hundreds of people turned their attention toward the stage. Rachel leaned forward in her chair expecting the first panel introduction. What she did not realize was that the moderator was not about to introduce a panel at all. The moderator adjusted the microphone and smiled at the audience with the calm confidence of someone who understood the weight of the moment unfolding in front of him. The ballroom had grown completely silent except for the faint sound of cameras clicking near the back of the room. Rachel leaned slightly closer to the stage, her attention fixed forward as if the next sentence might finally reveal the man she had been imagining for weeks. The moderator thanked the guests for attending and spoke briefly about the importance of resilience in business, about how the past year had tested many companies across the country. He mentioned economic pressure, shifting markets, and the leaders who had stepped forward to stabilize organizations when uncertainty threatened their future. Rachel nodded along quietly as he spoke, the way people do when a story sounds familiar. Then the moderator paused for a moment and said that one company in particular had become a symbol of that resilience. He spoke about Linda Parker and the design firm that had nearly closed its doors before a strategic investment transformed its direction. Rachel's posture straightened instantly when she heard her mother's name spoken through the speakers. The moderator explained that the investment had not only preserved hundreds of jobs, but had also allowed the company to expand into 3 new regional markets within a year. Rachel whispered under her breath that this must be the moment. Her eyes moved quickly across the stage as if she expected a tall executive in a tailored suit to appear from the side curtain at any second. The moderator continued speaking, describing the investor as someone who believed the strongest influence in business often comes from decisions made quietly and carefully. He said that the man responsible for the investment preferred to remain outside the spotlight, focusing on strategy rather than recognition. Rachel listened closely, her expression filled with curiosity. I could almost see the image forming in her mind, the powerful figure she had imagined for so long. The moderator then said that after months of speculation, the board had finally convinced the investor to attend the conference in person. A ripple of anticipation moved through the audience as people shifted slightly in their chairs. Rachel glanced around the ballroom as if trying to guess which of the executives sitting nearby might suddenly stand up. The moderator smiled again and said that before the conference officially began, he wanted to invite the investor responsible for the company's turnaround to open the event with a few words about leadership and long-term vision. The lights above the stage brightened slightly while the moderator stepped aside from the podium. Rachel leaned forward in her chair, her hands resting on the edge of the table in front of her. Her attention was completely fixed on the empty space beside the podium where the investor would appear. What she did not realize yet was that the organizing committee was not waiting for someone backstage to walk forward. They were waiting for someone already sitting quietly in the audience to stand. For a moment, the ballroom stayed completely still, the way a room does when hundreds of people expect something important to happen, but nothing has moved yet. Rachel kept watching the side curtain beside the stage, waiting for the mysterious investor to appear. Her eyes stayed fixed forward, scanning the empty entrance with growing curiosity. Around us, several executives leaned slightly toward one another, whispering quiet guesses about who the investor might be. The moderator waited patiently beside the podium, his expression calm, as if he already knew something the audience did not. Seconds passed. Then he looked directly toward the center of the ballroom. His gaze moved slowly across the rows of tables until it settled somewhere behind us. Rachel noticed the shift and turned her head slightly, following the direction of his eyes. Other people in the room began to look around as well, trying to figure out who he was addressing. I could feel the subtle ripple of confusion spreading through the crowd. Rachel whispered that maybe the investor was sitting somewhere nearby. Her voice carried a small note of excitement, the kind people have when they think they are about to witness something rare. The moderator spoke again, his voice clear through the speakers. He said that the investor preferred to sit among the audience rather than arrive with an introduction that placed him above everyone else. He said the man believed leadership was not about standing on a stage, but about understanding the people whose work built the company every day. Rachel nodded slightly, impressed by the idea. She whispered that it sounded exactly like the kind of thoughtful leader she had imagined. I remained still in my chair while the moderator continued speaking. He thanked the investor for attending and said the board was grateful not only for the financial support that saved the company, but also for the strategy that helped guide its recovery. Rachel's attention shifted again across the room as she searched for the person he was describing. The moderator paused once more, and then said that before the opening session began he would like to invite the founder of Caldwell Capital to come forward and share a few words about long-term vision and responsible leadership. The name echoed softly through the ballroom. Rachel's head turned quickly in my direction without fully understanding why. For a second, she simply looked at me with a puzzled expression, as if she had heard something that almost made sense, but not quite. Around us, several people were already scanning the audience, trying to identify the person connected to the name. The moderator extended his hand toward the seating area and repeated the invitation calmly. The room waited. Rachel's eyes remained fixed on my face, searching for an explanation that had not yet reached her. And in that quiet moment before anyone else reacted, I slowly pushed my chair back from the table and stood up. The sound of my chair moving across the floor was quiet, but somehow it carried through the entire ballroom. Rachel did not speak at first. She simply stared at me as if her mind was trying to correct a mistake that reality had not yet explained. Around us, a few heads turned when people noticed someone standing in the center section of the audience. The moderator remained beside the podium with the same calm expression he had worn since the beginning of the announcement. I buttoned my jacket slowly, the way I always do before stepping into a meeting, and walked toward the aisle between the tables. Rachel's eyes followed every step. Confusion moved across her face in small waves, like someone watching a puzzle rearrange itself in real time. She whispered my name once under her breath, but the word barely reached me over the quiet murmur spreading through the room. As I stepped into the aisle, the moderator gestured toward the stage again and repeated the introduction. He said it was his honor to welcome Ethan Caldwell, founder of Caldwell Capital, the investor responsible for stabilizing Linda Parker Design Group during its most difficult year. The name echoed through the speakers again, this time followed by a few scattered claps from the audience. Several executives near the front tables began applauding politely, while others turned in their chairs to see who was walking toward the stage. Rachel remained frozen in her seat. Her hands rested on the edge of the table exactly where they had been moments earlier, but her expression had changed completely. The certainty she carried into the conference had disappeared, replaced by a quiet disbelief that was still searching for confirmation. I walked calmly down the aisle while the applause slowly grew louder. My steps felt ordinary to me because I had taken similar walks into boardrooms and conferences for years. But for Rachel, it must have felt like watching two different worlds collide at once. When I reached the steps beside the stage, the moderator extended his hand and greeted me with a respectful nod. Cameras near the back of the ballroom adjusted their focus, while several reporters raised their phones to capture the moment. The moderator thanked me again for attending and stepped aside from the podium so I could speak. As I turned toward the audience, my eyes moved across the rows of tables until they found Rachel sitting exactly where I had left her. She had not moved. Her gaze was fixed on the stage now with an expression that carried both surprise and realization at the same time. The screen behind me displayed the conference logo while the room settled into silence again. I placed one hand on the podium and looked out at the crowd of executives, investors, and journalists who had come to hear the opening remarks. But for a brief second, my attention returned to Rachel. The same person who had spent weeks imagining the mysterious investor was now looking directly at him for the first time. I let the room settle before speaking because silence has a way of focusing attention better than any dramatic introduction. Hundreds of faces looked toward the stage while the soft hum of cameras faded into the background. My voice sounded calm through the microphone when I finally began. I thanked the organizers for the invitation and said it was an honor to see so many leaders gathered in one place to talk about the future of their industries. I spoke about resilience first, about how companies often face moments when the numbers on paper look impossible and the path forward seems uncertain. I explained that during those moments the most valuable asset is not money but perspective. A business can survive temporary losses if someone is willing to see the long-term picture clearly. As I continued speaking, I noticed Rachel sitting near the center of the ballroom, exactly where she had been before I stood up. She had not taken her eyes off the stage. Her expression was no longer confusion alone. It was the quiet realization that the story she had repeated for weeks was unfolding differently than she imagined. I explained to the audience that when my team first reviewed Linda Parker Design Group, we did not see a failing company. We saw a strong foundation that had been pushed into the wrong market cycle. The firm had loyal clients, talented designers, and a brand that still carried trust across several states. What it needed was time and a financial structure that allowed the leadership team to rebuild without panic. That is why Caldwell Capital stepped in quietly rather than announcing the investment publicly. Sometimes the best support is the kind that allows a company to stand on its own feet again without feeling rescued. Several people in the audience nodded as they listened. When I finished describing the strategy, one thanked Linda Parker for her leadership and said that her determination had made the recovery possible. The applause that followed was warm and genuine. As the sound echoed through the ballroom, my attention moved once more to Rachel. She was still sitting perfectly still, absorbing every word. In that moment, she was no longer imagining a distant billionaire somewhere beyond our everyday life. She was seeing the reality that had existed quietly beside her all along. When the moderator returned to the stage and the opening session continued, the audience shifted its focus to the next panel discussion. People around Rachel began whispering to each other, some glancing toward her with polite curiosity once they realized who she was sitting beside earlier. The conference moved forward the way professional events always do, with schedules and presentations and conversations filling the next several hours. But when I stepped down from the stage and walked back through the aisle, Rachel finally stood up to meet me halfway. She looked at me with the same searching expression she had worn since the moment I stood from my chair. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she asked quietly how long I had been building Caldwell Capital. I told her the truth. More than a decade. She nodded slowly, as if every memory from the past 8 years was rearranging itself inside her mind. The quiet life she thought she understood had always contained something far larger just beneath the surface.